Basically what this book is about is the ambassador wife, John Mayhem Barry Sill. He was the ambassador to Korea from 1894 until 1897. As you can see, he's charming and friendly, professor of English. He's one of the original English teachers, too. You know, how you hear all this stuff about how English teachers in Korea are bad. This guy was a professor of English. Served as a member of the University of Michigan's Board of Regents, and like many people at that time, he got his position because of friends. Okay. 1893, financial collapse in the United States. He took a big hit, called in some cards, markers with some friends. They got him appointed as the minister to Korea. He took that opportunity to save some money and paid off his debts. He was far from qualified for the position. In fact, the only reason why he came over was so he could look at flora and fauna. His big thing, spiders and flowers. That's all he did while he was here. I mean, every reference is his garden, and he was very, very proud of his garden. His wife, Sally Sill, described by one contemporary historian as a sweet elderly woman. She was to an extent, but she had a tongue. Her fingers were brilliantly blunt. She would tell the story the way she saw it. We don't normally get to see much gossip because everything from this period is usually sanitized. And that's what makes this so important, because we can compare it between her husband's letters to the State Department and what she's writing home. And they don't always jive with each other. She had severe arthritis, and she was extremely depressed. She did not want to leave the United States. She did not want to leave her family. And it's partly because of that that we got all these letters. Going along with them was her teenage son, Joseph Sill. Obviously, he's not a teenager at this picture. Kind of a goofy kid. You read his letters, he's speaking in French and German and just kind of a normal teenager, just messing up everywhere. Caused his father quite some problems with the American military. Evidently, he was aboard one of the ships, and he sent some letters home that were a little bit too revealing, and somehow they ended up in the press. It was a big thing back then. In fact, Sill was warned about this several times. Do not send letters back home and let them get into the press. In fact, the very first letter that this woman sends, his sister-in-law, Elizabeth Beaumont Grant, also known as Lily, her very first letter back to the United States was published in her hometown newspaper. And it did not go well. I mean, I went to that hometown newspaper, compared it to the letter, it's exact. He was furious. The State Department was furious. These are examples of some of their letters. 750 pages. It took me a year to transcribe, and these are the clean ones. These are extremely clean. These we can all read. Now, I'm a grandfather. I'm getting up there in age. It took me forever to learn how to read their writing, especially hers. None of her letters are in here. This is John's letter over here on the left, and down here on the left, and this is Elizabeth, Lily's letter. These are all very clean. Sally's letters, she suffered from arthritis and rheumatism. You can see it. She's shaking all over the place. It's nasty, especially at 2 in the morning. The voyage to Korea. They departed Michigan in late February 1894, and they went by train. It was a long train ride. Sally does not write at all during this period. She is extremely depressed. They're completely worried about her. They arrive in Los Angeles in early March. Now, read the book. The letter's all in there. I don't think you want to know about the United States. But when they arrive in Los Angeles, they pick up Elizabeth, Lily. It appears that Lily has fallen under the bad influence of one of their distant cousins. She was recently widowed. Her husband died well, I shouldn't say recently, maybe 4 years prior to that. And she was just drifting. So they decided to take her to Korea to provide her with a purpose in life again. They stayed in the Los Angeles, San Francisco area for about 20 days, as it says here, buying up everything they could. Going to Korea was not an easy task back then. At this time, there were almost no stores here. Cheomyeolpo, or what we know as Incheon now, had some stores, but everything there was extremely expensive. I think in Korea Through Western Eyes, I have a list of what the price of goods were back then. Extremely expensive. These guys had to live off whatever they could grow. They left for Japan on March 20th aboard the steamship Gaelic. I believe it was the Gaelic that was also the ship that brought the Korean immigrants to Hawaii. And that first ship was the one that was quarantined for smallpox or cholera. Board the ship, these women have a horrible time on that ship. Sally and Lily are seasick constantly. That's all you're reading about. Seasick, seasick. And even John gets seasick. I don't know why that was so important, but they had to stress that. Even John got sick. They took with them 36 boxes of goods, including stoves, furniture, bedding, groceries, condensed milk. Condensed milk, kind of a strange thing here in Korea. 1888, we had huge riots. They're called the baby riots. Part of that was because of condensed milk. Many Koreans were convinced that the Westerners didn't have cows, so how were they getting their milk? Obviously, they were taking Korean women and lopping off their breasts and putting them in cans, and that's how we got our milk. It didn't go over well with the Koreans, and so we had a number of incidents. Fortunately, it died down quickly. Same time, we had the baby, foreigners were taking babies and eating them. And strange thing. Seeds, garden tools, and a piano. I do not know why you would bring a piano to Korea. It doesn't make sense. And it wasn't the only piano. There was a piano in Busan. The British consulate brought his piano. Why? Who are you giving a concert to? There are only like 7 people there. Who's listening to it? In Japan, they purchased 3 cows. Part of the reason why they purchased cows was for the milk. At this time, a lot of Koreans viewed milk cows as something cruel. They could not comprehend the ideal of milking a cow. They thought it was cruel to the calf because you were taking all of its milk. In fact, one missionary actually had to give up the ideal of milk cows because his congregation was getting ready to riot on him. Life aboard the ship. Chinese. Most ships traveling between the west coast of the United States and back towards China were usually filled with Chinese. Most of these Chinese were going back, well, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of them were going back to die. Their big thing was to die back on the homeland. And a lot of them had to take out insurance. You had to pay a certain amount of money, depending on your age and the possibility of you dying. And you paid this insurance that if you died, you would not be buried at sea. There was one ship, as many of you know, I write about the gold miners in northern Korea at this time. There was one ship, there was almost a riot because a number of the Chinese had died during a storm. They were going to bury them at sea. It was a no-go. They actually had to lock the Chinese in the hold and have guards on it to make sure that they couldn't take over the ship. Also on the ship were missionaries returning to China. And as you can see here, Joe relates, his son, the teenage son. The Chinese natives sometimes had queer notions about them, the missionaries. One was that they had a hole right through the chest, and that when they wanted to travel anywhere, a large bamboo pole was thrust through this hole, and a man took end of the pole on his shoulders and carried them off. It seems that one of the American missionary women had Chinese women going behind her, trying to find that hole. This is what the Sills were being exposed to on their journey to Korea. And it's starting to color them because they have no idea what's ahead of them in Korea. Here we have more Chinese. Arrived in Yokohama in April. Here you can see supplying the ship with coal. This was a common practice. Of course, anytime you see something like this, it's new to you, so you're going to comment about it. And of course, Lily comments. We were most of the day at a little place where they took in coal. It interested us to see them load up, men and women half naked, looking more like animals than human beings. Everything I find in Japan at this time, everybody takes this picture. Everybody's got this on their photo album. For the first couple of days in Japan, the women were extremely sick. The seasickness, they were extremely sick. They stayed at the Grand Hotel. I don't know if anybody knows the Grand Hotel in Yokohama. Probably one of the most famous hotels in the Far East. It was claimed to be on par with the finest hotels in Europe. The hotel owner was from San Francisco, or the hotel manager was from San Francisco. Espinger, I think his name was, invented a famous cocktail. If you look it up on the internet, you'll see it. They still have it. John, the ambassador. This guy he goes native a lot. In Japan, he goes and buys all these Japanese clothing, wears them incorrectly, and gets a very bad rash. Wife's got to take care of it. In Korea, buys all these clothing, same thing, gets a very bad rash. Once again, like 2 weeks in a row, all you hear is, John's still got this bad rash. I mean, you have to think about your own mother or your grandmother writing about every ailment that she's ever had. That's what this is half the time. I mean, I know more about them than I know about myself. John went to the Mikado Fest in Tokyo. Big thing. He goes, son goes with him. Doesn't have that silk frock or that hat. Back home with him. Women are still there. There's very little that they write about on this time because the women are stuck. The women are the ones that are writing all these letters. And so we don't get that much information. Yokohama. I told you, you're going to have lots of pictures because I don't want to talk. This is about, I think, 1900. That's the Grand Hotel. The menu is in the book. It's an extensive menu. It's unbelievable. Japanese merchants. I put this up so you can compare them to the Korean merchants. That's a lot of stuff. My ajima in my neighborhood does the same thing. She's got all those boxes on there and stuff. Japanese coastal village. As they sailed from Yokohama, they went to Kobe, and then they went on to Nagasaki. It was along the inner sea that the women actually started to enjoy themselves. It was actually calm enough where they weren't as seasick. Nagasaki in 1890. They're only here for a short time. Nagasaki is the key to Korea. You're going to find that all of your Westerners in Korea either came from Nagasaki or they came from Shanghai. So if you're going to do any research on these guys, you have to go to Nagasaki and you have to go to Shanghai to look up their past there. The name directly under Nagasaki is George Lake. If you've read my previous book, you know how much I like George Lake. He's probably the most nefarious American to have been in Korea at this time. What's strange about this is, as the Sills arrive here, George Lake's name is in the newspaper. He's been deported once again. The Lake family is extremely important to Korea, and I don't understand why nobody's really done anything with it. All of the early business ventures stem from the Lake Company. They're the ones that financed everybody. They're also the ones that helped finance Korea's first attempts at steamships. They sold several steamships to the Korean government, and then when the Korean government was late with their payments, they foreclosed on them and brought them back for a great deal less money than was paid for them. The Korean government was pretty angry about that for quite some time. George Lake, thrown out of Korea, thrown out of Japan. First time he's thrown out of Japan is like in 1871. Troublemaker, he goes back to the United States, finds his daughter, who is in an orphanage, takes her out, and grooms her. I think that's what they say pedophiles do. He grooms his own daughter, marries her, has 5 children from her, all of them mentally unstable. The mother of the daughter commits suicide because she can't believe he's doing this. He goes to prison for several years, gets out, still got a lot of money because he owns a huge company in Japan, Nagasaki. Gets out and immediately comes back to Japan, straight to Nagasaki. In Nagasaki for only a short time before the Japanese government said to get back out. They deport him 4 more times. And the Sills come in just at this time. In fact, this is the last time he's been deported. When he's deported this time, he goes to Busan. Once he gets to Busan, the Sino-Japanese War starts, and he can't get back, and so he moves up to Chemulpo, or Incheon. He's the first American murdered in Korea. He was murdered in 1898, supposedly by an Irish American, but most likely by a Chinese neighbor. And the Irishman who was accused of murdering him was found guilty in Korea, even though the initial coroner's report indicated that Lake had died from natural causes. But an American senator in the good state of Massachusetts said he was murdered, and you will find the murderer. So they take this Irish guy, and he becomes the murderer. Spent American ambassador at that time even builds a nice jail for him. He's here for 2.5 years. Goes back to the United States. He's at San Quentin. He's there a couple of years, something like that. He's given another trial. He's found innocent. The day that he's found innocent and he's let out, San Francisco earthquake hits. And he wrote back to the American minister and he said, I left hell and entered hell in the same day. So, and then he disappeared. I don't know where he went. If I was him, I would have disappeared too. They board the Haigo Maru and they head over to Busan. Now, as they get on this ship, there's a lot of fear with the women, because in between Nagasaki and Korea, that's not the smoothest stretch of water. And on top of that, a large storm has moved in. So they hit Korea, Busan, on April 23rd in a storm. And it seems kind of fitting that they would arrive in Korea during a storm, because a storm is definitely brewing. The Sino-Japanese War is right on the verge of happening. It's so close that the Chinese minister is getting his family out of Korea. In fact, when he leaves Korea, he sneaks out with the Russian military attaché as one of his servants. It's the only way he can get out. Wonderful Busan port. A lot of people ask, Busan, what's the difference? Busan is actually the Japanese settlement. Busan would have been the Korean side of it. Most of the trade is done in this area, the Japanese section. You'll see that everything looks Japanese. When they arrived, though it poured with rain, the flag, John had the American flag put on this Japanese steamship, signaling, the American ambassador's coming. With the rain, the flag brought all the Americans in town, 7 in the number, on board. They took John and Joe out to luncheon. Again, everybody's got a backstory here. We have Reverend William Baird, his wife, their daughter, nice people. Dr. Hugh Brown, and his wife. Please disregard the second Brown. And then you have my favorite person, Dr. Charles Irving. This man is a stellar example. He, the ultimate snake oil peddler. He made his own snake oil and he peddled it all up and down Korea. And they found out that basically had nothing in it except for drugs. It'd make you happy, and that was it. The sterling example of missionary. His wife went back to the United States with their son to put him in school. When she returned to Korea, the locks on the door were literally changed. She was locked out. He was living with his Korean mistress. Nice guy. Needless to say, he's thrown out. He doesn't care. His nickname is Dr. Gold Dollar, and he's making the money. He built his own hospital, one of the best hospitals in Korea at the time, but he was raking in the money. He didn't need any missionary board to tell him what to do. Here we go again with some more of the port. I actually like this picture a lot. Streets in Busan. You can see a lot of Japanese here. Buildings are all. This is one of my favorite Korean and Japanese children. Kind of a little friendly. They arrived in Cheomgyeopal on April 25th. It's only 2 days from Busan. It was pretty easy travel. Cheomgyeopal is probably about 1890. I like the laundry out here. This is the Daebutsu Hotel. This was the largest hotel, probably the earliest hotel in this area. It was owned by a Japanese man. During the Sino-Japanese War, the Japanese accused him of being a spy. It appears that one of the officers wanted to get control of his hotel. He's found innocent. Somewhere over here is Stewart's Hotel. I used to believe it was across, but it's got to be over here in the Chinese section. Stewart was actually a steward on a ship. I still don't know if it was a British ship or an American ship. And he served with Lucius Foote, the first American minister to Korea. Served as part of his staff. When Lucius Foote left Korea, he goes and he starts his own business. And his business is one of the longest businesses in Cheomgyeopal and Seoul, the Stewart's Company. Hotels. I used to believe there were only 3 hotels. It appears there are more and more hotels coming up all the time. There was Steep Crest Hotel, there was Sea View Hotel, Harry's Hotel, Daebutsu Hotel, Stewart's Hotel. I can't remember the other one. But up until a couple of years, we only knew 2 or 3 hotels. They stayed at Stewart's Hotel for like 2 days, and then they got up in the morning and they came out on a steamship. There was actually, I think there were 2 small steamships traveling in between the Chemyeolpo and Yongsan or Mapo. I'm not sure which port they were stopped at. Traveling by steamship up the Han River was not the easiest thing. In fact, everybody joked about how many times you got stranded on it, how many times you were stranded, and actually had to get out and walk your way to Seoul. It almost didn't pay to do it. There weren't that many ways to get into Seoul either. One of the stories that they talked about, Wonderful Sally, giving that great gossip, was about one of the naval officers. He came from Chemyeolpo with 2 other naval officers, and they decided to take a rickshaw. And I know many people say that the rickshaws weren't introduced into Korea until like 1895. I don't know how that can be, because you're going to see a slide up here that clearly is the American Embassy in 1884, and there are 2 rickshaws in front of it. But the rickshaws, this large naval officer who weighed 200 pounds. Okay, you know, I'm an American, so 200 pounds, hey, that's thin. But back then, that wasn't thin. That was huge. And I can just imagine these little rickshaw pullers looking at this guy going, no. No. And it was a common thing back then. They would get, it's like the taxis over here in Incheon. You know, you get in the taxi, it tells you 30,000 won. You get just outside of Incheon, and then he tells you it's 100,000 won. If you don't like it, get out. That's the way these guys did it too. They'd get you just outside of Chemyeolpo, and then tell you, no, I'm not going on any further. And with this 200-pound guy, you could understand. There were a lot of 200-pound foreigners coming into Korea at that time. It got out halfway, and suddenly the Jin rickshaw broke, and the guy ended up coming back. And he wasn't hurt except for his pride. That's what she said. Nothing hurt but his pride. John actually liked to take rickshaws. When he was in Japan, he fell in love with them. When he came to Korea, he used to take the rickshaw from Chemyeolpo to Seoul all the time. Other than that, you had to take the pony. Korean ponies, notoriously violent, vicious. One missionary said he learned more from the pony than anybody else in his life. He used to love seeing that pony shooed, hearing that pony scream in pain. And this is a missionary. It's kind of a scary thing. These are probably some of the sites that they did see. A lumber yard, probably in the Noryeongjin area or something like that. I like the little boy with the chicken. Can't go wrong with a chicken on your head. I don't know why. And obviously nudity. We got this little boy over here running around with nothing but a smile. And we have the woman here with the bared breast. A lot of missionaries at this time wanted to go and solve this problem in indecency. They wanted to go and put cloth over them. I think Peter, I think your father once told me a story about a missionary woman going by trying to pin up cloth over the women's breasts. Wasn't a thing of shame. These bared breasts were actually mountains of honor. I mean, they showed that you had a son. And only a woman with a son could bear her breast. Now, obviously, the nobility weren't going out there bearing their breast. But it wasn't a thing of shame. Timber, firewood, big time, always. These cows, very, very docile. A ferry boat. These ferry boats, they had different kinds. And they were generally safe, supposed to be free, supposed to be. supposed to be allotted things, but sometimes people would charge money, especially for a foreigner. A lot of accidents. If you read The Independent, the first English newspaper published in Korea, you can find accounts of ferry boats sinking and people drowning. Korean pony and this noble, very nice-looking pony. The Sill family, while they were here in Korea, had their own ponies. Lily had hers. John loved naming things, and he named her pony the Terror of the Orient. And actually, her pony was actually pretty good. Hers was nice and tame, but the two Allen boys, Horace Allen at this time, as many of you know, he was the first doctor, but he was also the secretary of the American legation at this time. After Sill, he becomes the new ambassador to Korea. Allen had two boys, Harry and Maurice, and very rambunctious little boys. John Sill, the ambassador, really enjoyed them. Him and Allen had quite some words over their behavior. But their two ponies used to fight all the time. They would fight with the Terror of the Orient. These ponies, I think I found a reference in Galveston, Texas, at a sideshow in 1888 that had two Korean ponies in it. And they were described as devils from the east. And normally when you think of ponies, you think of little children riding them. No, not this. Here is a rice selling store. This is 1884. This is 1883, 1884. It's Vesuvius oil picture. I like the woman over here in the corner. The nice little donkey over there. Okay. American legation, once they arrived in Korea, here we have the wonderful jinrickshas. This is 1884. Actually, these two jinrickshas probably came from Harry's Hotel. There were 50 jinrickshas imported into Korea in January 1884. During the Kapsan coup attempt in December, a lot of these rickshaws were destroyed. They were viewed as, foreign innovations and not something that should be in Korea. Naturally, when John gets here, he's got to present himself to the king. And here's wonderful Kwanghamun and kids. I mean, look at them. They're everywhere. Even on top of the hay. I mean, what do you do? Here we have the one of the audience halls. King Gojong, 1883, 1884, another Vesuvius Low. Kind of a good-looking guy. Most Westerners liked him. Most Westerners had good things to say about him. Said he was handsome. He wasn't tall. I think he was like 5'6". Kind of bad when you have Horace Allen towering up at 6 foot something, and then you have like Appenzeller at 6 feet, and all these missionaries, huge guys looking down on the king. So, John goes to his first meeting. And first you meet the ministers. And at this meeting with the ministers, he discovers the problem with age in Korea. When I said I was 63, they began to think I was a boastful fraud. It is, in Korea, a great thing to be old. And they looked me over and pointed to my hair and grinned sarcastically. John actually looks pretty young. They thought I was doing some tall bragging. The president of the War Office, a venerable white-haired man, looked particularly injured and incredulous. He said, "Why, I'm only 65 and I'm a great deal older than you." I bet that this suffered exaggerated account of my age has brought me into some discredit. It's amazing. Usually in the West, we lie. We say we're much younger. In Korea, you want to be older. Even I've read accounts that King Gojong lied about his age. And I don't know how he could lie about it. But I guess if you're king, you can lie about it. You can say anything. Yeah. Everything you say is true. War. I actually, I have so many slides that I didn't do much on the war. As you can see, I have two dates there, July 25th and August 1st. July 25th is when hostilities actually opened up. Time to do some Japanese bashing. Japan has a problem with declaring war before attacking. July 25th, they sank a couple of Chinese ships. They sunk the Kaohsiung, which was carrying 1,200 Chinese soldiers. It had a German general who was working for the Chinese government. The Kaohsiung was a British flag ship. I think we all know Tojo. He was the captain of the ship that sank the Kaohsiung. Big trouble all around. They wanted to hang him as a pirate because war had not been declared. It caused a great deal of concern between the Japanese government and the British government. Eventually, though, it was ruled that the Kaohsiung had become a belligerent and had entered the area of war, even though war had not been declared. War doesn't get declared until August 1st. Now, by then, we've already had, what? Almost a week of fighting. Big battle took place in Asan. Chinese completely routed. There was a French priest that was killed by the Chinese there. Chinese had a tendency to kill anybody and everybody that was near them when they were losing. Here we have John and some American naval officers on their way for an audience with the king. See, John looks pretty young, doesn't he? Doesn't look like he's 63. When I get this age, I want to be the same. Maybe a little bit thinner, though. I don't know. You see a lot of these. Everybody, all the naval officers that come, they all have to do this little thing with the king. In the United States, we had some idiots. We had Captain Jewell. He didn't like being bothered. He didn't want to send troops to help protect the Americans here. He said that if it was his choice, he'd cut off the head of all the damn missionaries and throw them out of Korea. He was not a happy man. John's actually not happy with the commander of this. I don't know if he's in here or not. I don't know the identities of these two officers. John wanted troops sent once the war had been opened. He wanted a legation guard because there was a great deal of unrest in Seoul. Houses were being broken into. And they weren't exactly afraid of the Japanese because the Japanese had control of the city now. They were actually afraid of the rioting Korean soldiers. Soldiers actually were doing a lot of the mischief. So he asked for a Marine Guard, won't send it. John has to send back to the State Department before he finally gets his Marine Guard. And here's a guard at the American legation. Guards, always great to have. Not only do they provide protection, but they provide entertainment. New faces. New scandals. It's a great thing to have them. Marines at that time, Marines now, same thing. Alcohol, fun. These guys have their problem. This is the Baltimore, I believe. Winter of 1894, 1895, one sailor sells his rifle for $10 to a Japanese merchant because he had that irresistible urge to drink. Now, Seoul's a very small Western community. I mean, there's nobody here. There's no shops. It's a very small. Where is he drinking at? It's got to be on the Japanese side of town. So he sells his rifle for $10. The Japanese merchant comes and says, Here's a rifle, I want my $10, you know. They take the rifle, they feed him and say, you know better than that. The guy comes back a couple of days, I think it's 10 days later, and he's arrested. I think he got 5 years in the brig or something like that. It was an expensive binge. At about the same time, a letter gets sent to the United States, to the Department of Navy, I think, or I'm not sure who it was. And it's about the American soldiers. We have to blush for American soldiers and some officers from the Baltimore. They get beastly drunk and carouse about the streets in a most disgraceful manner, frightening and surprising the Japanese and Koreans. Now, State Department want answers. And John's been ordered to investigate this. And John goes about it and finds out that Reverend Samuel Moore's wife, Rose, she said she's the one that sent the letter. And when he asked her, well, what Koreans were molested? I don't remember. Where did it happen? I don't remember. What men were involved? I don't remember. She couldn't remember anything. John denounced her as a holy liar, along with her husband. If any of you are familiar, Samuel Moore is responsible for the liberation of the butchers. He got them put on the same level, able to attend church and all that. He's also similar to the guy that went into the Buddhist temple not too long ago and urinated on the relics. Samuel Moore didn't quite do that. He went into the Buddhist temple and he knocked over all the images and, well, he didn't knock them over. The priest in him agreed that they should be knocked over. So, Horace Allen said, holy liar. Excursions and disease. There's just too much to really go into, so I'm just going to grab anything I can. Nice, lots of pictures. Children, lots of children. All the missionary children would come to the legation. I believe these are the Appenzellers, but I'm not sure. The Sills love children. And for Sally, this was something really, really important because it kind of alleviated that homesickness that she had. Because Joe, who had accompanied her, now is back in the United States. He's gone on to medical school. And so she's longing for her son. That's all she writes about, how much she misses him. So she kind of adopts every child that she can find, be them Korean, Chinese, Japanese, American, British, the British ambassador's children. She loved them very much. Of course, they weren't the only ones that loved children. King Gojong and Queen Min loved little Western children too. And they invited them to the palace. They invited the Allen children. Now that's a mistake just waiting to happen. Here they are, and they can't see the king and queen yet. First you have to go through the pre-thing with the ministers and the ladies in waiting and all that, and you have to eat. Now, Sally and Lily said, you can chop off my head. I'm not eating. But the boys are more than willing to eat. The boys took everything and eat with relish. Here was a chance for a pleasant remark. And we've all seen this before. Oh, you eat kimchi so well. Oh, you're just like a Korean. Here was a chance for a pleasant remark, to say something that might make up for our not eating much. So Miss Allen sweetly said, Harry is very fond of Korean food. He promptly replied, oh no, Mama, I like American food much better. And Morris, the younger boy, echoed, with his mouth full, so do I. I was convulsed at Miss Allen's look of dismay. Now, horrible thing. But it's not the king and queen. So that's good. Except, we have the king and queen. Now they go into the royal audience to see the king, and the king and queen took a great notice of the boys. All Koreans are fond of children. They're all children in reality. The king called the boys one at a time to come to him, took them by the hand, and seemed to enjoy talking to them. The queen did the same, and the crown prince looked on with a set smile. Seung-jong does not like children. This man does not. I've never seen any comment when he's seen children that he smiles with a genuine smile. King and queen, they go crazy for children. Gojong would go out of his way to snag a little Western child. In talking to Harry Allen, the queen remarked that she supposed he would go to school in Korea when he got to be a big boy. "Oh no," was the reply. "There are no large schools in Korea. Or perhaps there will be by the time," the queen hastened to say. But he insisted with a decided air, "I think I must go to America when I get old enough." Miss Allen is somewhat of a diplomat and thought it wise to remark that Korea was the only home the boys had. At once, the boys exclaimed with a look of disgust, "Why do you say that? America is our real home." Such wonderful little children. These are the same angels that during the height of the unrest, the Tongak, where everybody believed that the Tongak were on their way to Seoul to kill all the foreigners, people were told you're not to fire any guns or anything, no firecrackers, no nothing. They went out and threw firecrackers everywhere, frightened the neighbors and everything. Allen was severely chastised for it, and he was rather upset about that because he was a secretary and he should not be treated like that. He was a schoolboy. And this bothers him to no end. We hear about this again in 1897 when Sills loses his position. Travel all around. This is Pagoda Park. You've seen it down Tapko Gomon. Back then, surrounded by buildings. You could not find it. This is a Lowell picture from 1883, 1884. The top section, the two pieces on top, could not be replaced because if they were replaced, it was believed that the kingdom of Joseon would fall. I think it was 1947, the American military put the two pieces back up on top. 1948, wow. Yeah. Countryside, great place to dry your clothing. Should always do it there. I'm not sure, but I think this is the lily of the Valley of Lilies. I'm not sure. Maybe Peter knows. Is that? Is this the Lily Valley?
세금전 그 세계가 딱 오른쪽으로 맞아요. 세금전 지나서 오른쪽으로.
So we're all going to agree it's the Lily Valley? All right. So, a long time ago, there used to be lots of lilies. And some of the young entrepreneurs found out that Westerners like lilies. So they went out there and they harvested all the lilies. And by 1905, the Lily Valley was no longer the Valley of Lilies. Bukhan Monastery, about 1888. They went up on the hill several times. Do I? All right, I'm going to turn before you guys translate this. Wow. Bukhan Mountain Train, yes. That's a bad thing. I have to do it just to make myself feel better. Okay. Somewhere on this mountain, I think it was 1889, 1890, something like that. One of the foreigners went up there and found large groups of Koreans with toothaches. And they would go to this stone and rub their afflicted area on that stone. And there was a priest nearby who would help bless them for a certain deal of money. And if your toothache didn't go away, it was because you didn't pay enough. So you had to resubmit more money in order for that toothache to go away. That might be the stone. I don't know for sure. Walls, this is 1888, 1889. I like it just because you can see the little shops and stuff. It's also the only way I can present the picture. Otherwise nobody will see it. Rains, floods, and disease, cholera. Big, big problem. Obviously this picture is not from that period. This is probably about 1910, something like that.
22, right? Yeah, 20s, 30s.
I don't think it's 20s, 30s. I don't think it's that late.
No.
I think this is about somewhere in the teens or 10s. All right, anyway. Big problem back then. Cholera. Cholera was everywhere. Rainy season. We've all experienced it. 1896 was an extremely bad, 1895, 1896, those years, extremely bad rainy seasons. In fact, part of the American legation's roof caved in. Wasn't good. I did an article not too long ago about the forbidden fruit. Melon was a forbidden fruit. If you are a Korean and you worked for a Westerner, you could be fired for eating watermelon. At the American gold mines in northern Korea, Unsan, those grounds to be fired immediately, and they would take your melon and you and throw you off the American concession. It was believed that the watermelon was leading to all this cholera outbreak. Big problem. There were a lot of deaths. In fact, the Sills were supposed to go on vacation to Japan, and they actually postponed it a little bit because of the cholera. And actually in Japan, the cholera was much worse than it was here. Too much to go into. Queen men. The Sills make their way to Japan. I want to say they left in September. They make their way to Japan. Prior to leaving, John kind of makes sure that everything's kind of decent in Korea. There's a lot of concern there. Alan, big mouth that he is, I really do not like Alan. Alan goes and assures the royal family that they are not in jeopardy. He assures Queen Min that she is safe and that she has nothing to fear from the Japanese. It's like famous last words. The Sill family were at Mimizuka. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. They were at Mimizuka on October 10th when they discovered that Queen Min had been killed or assassinated, murdered, whatever word you want to use. Mimizuka in Kyoto just happens to be the place where the Japanese have that huge shrine with 185,000 Korean noses and ears. Seems kind of bad that that's where they would have heard this from. Sally she's shocked. Just a couple of weeks prior to that, there was a large party at the palace. The men had their party with King Gojong, the women had their party with Queen Min. One of the things that Sally keeps saying is Queen Min kept saying over and over, "I'm sorry it's hot. I'm sorry it's hot. I'm sorry it's hot." That's all she kept saying. And it's my impression that it might have been in English. A lot of these noble women were actually coming to the American legation, and prior to coming, had practiced their English. They could say good day and thank you. Kind of a big thing back then. This is not Queen Min, incidentally. Okay, we don't have a picture of Queen Min. This was supposedly a picture of Queen Min, but there are no verified pictures of Queen Min. We feel very sad about the cruel murder of the Queen. Nothing can excuse such an outrage. And everyone hopes that whoever is in any way responsible for it will be made to suffer the utmost rigor of the law. We had 2 interviews, this is Sally talking, with the Queen the week before we left. And she was then full of life and energy, that it is hard to think of her life being so suddenly and horribly ended. Now, the Westerners always had a very strong impression of Queen Mary. Rose Foote, the first American minister's wife, was very, very fond of Queen Min. Annie Ellers was very fond of Queen Min. Everything you read from the Westerner's point of view, Queen Min is a good person. When you read from the Korean point of view from this time, they just smack her big time. The reputation that supposedly Sunjong was still sleeping with her, you know, like mother-son thing, still sleeping in the same room with her when up until she was killed. We have all heard about the strange necklace that she had in order to seduce King Gojong to consummate their wedding, because Gojong was not interested in her for nearly 2 years of their marriage and stuff. There's a lot of negative things by Koreans from this period. Seo-jae-pil just rips her apart. He has no kind words for her. This is the site, this is from 1900. This is the site supposedly where she was killed or near here. Peter was always nice to inform me that the bridge is on the wrong side, as we can see now. It was cold that day. It was seriously cold. I think that was Christmas, day before Christmas something. I froze getting this picture. I want you people to remember that. Think of the mistakes I've made, my spelling. Forget them. Just think about how cold I went. It's very beautiful. You can see the Queen's chambers in the back, and then supposedly the hill that she was burned on is over to the right-hand side. Peter, why is the bridge on the wrong side?
The Japanese put it on that side because her body was burnt at the foot of the bridge when it was on the proper side.
Right.
And leaving it there reminded people of the Queen and her death, so they put it on that side.
So why hasn't the Korean government moved it to the right side?
Very good question, and I've been criticizing that. And this one is really ugly and clunky compared to the original as well.
Okay.
It's really very bad.
I gave you your 5 seconds. That's it.
For an hour, if you'd like.
Next time.
Next lecture.
All right, New Year is 1896. A new year, a new beginning. Not really. 1896 starts off horribly for the Koreans. It is a year that everybody hates. It's the year of the haircut. Nobody wants it. The Gregorian calendar starts here. The Koreans are supposed to wear Western-style clothing. Nobody is happy with this. Westerners think, hey, the Koreans look pretty good with their hair now. But the Koreans were not happy. Sally writes, the great excitement here lately has been haircutting. The government issued a decree that on the 1st of January, all the men and boys must cut off their top knots. This is considered a great hardship and very mortifying. The poor king was one of the first victims, and he resisted, but it was of no avail. No Korean could be found who would cut his hair, knowing how he felt, so a Japanese barber did it. How insulting can that be? The old Taewon-gun felt so bad and considered it such a disgrace that he had a kind of fit and had a hemorrhage. Remember, it was cold outside. Ignore the king. Kind of fit and had a hemorrhage from the nose in consequence. This is a really, really big problem. This hair cutting is probably the biggest mistake the Japanese made during this time. I mean, food is not coming into the city. Nobody's going to come to the city and have their top knot cut off. In the countryside, anybody who's cutting off their top knot, they're getting mobbed. One father commits suicide because his son cuts his top knot off. There's a minister, one of the magistrates in one of the outer communities, is ripped apart by his constituents, his slaves, whatever you want to say. They rip him apart because of the hair cutting thing. This is also when we get that wonderful little story about the ghost going by cutting off people's top knots. Many of you know I like to write ghost stories and stories from the past. There was a ghost that cut off top knots. It's a horrible thing. On Kangwa Island, I think it's Kangwa Island, the sisters there, one of the religious establishments, I can't remember which one, said that for that day, all the boys were putting up their hair into top knots just so they could say that they had once had their hair in a top knot. It was a very, very big thing. Russian legation, February 11th, 1896. We have unrest all over Korea. And the Westerners are telling the Japanese, you started this, you need to solve this. And the Japanese, only if you make it official. If you make it official, then we'll have an open hand on this. Nobody will make it official for them. King Gojong, depending on which sources you read, whether they be the British or the American or the Russian, each one of the diplomatic dispatches, some of them say that he still believes Queen Min is alive. There's even stories that there's a ghost of Queen Min roaming about. Gojong is beginning to ask for asylum. He's asked the American legation, if I suddenly show up on your doorstep, are you going to let me in? And Sill tells him yes, and he gets in trouble for it later, because the United States will not allow their minister to provide asylum for any of the Korean officials, even though Sill does go ahead and do. I think he lets 11 Korean ministers in. It goes to the British. The British tell him the same thing. Sure, you know, whenever you want to come on, come on. But it's not really going to happen. Russians, same thing. But the Russians are a little bit serious, because we've brought over Speyer. The old ambassador was Weber, Carl Weber. He had been here in Korea, I think, since 1885. He was here with his wife, very powerful woman, very mean woman. I like her. She gives me some of the best stories in the world. I mean, she accuses the German ambassador of having orgies in the German legation. So this story goes out, and here comes Christmas Eve, the German ambassador going to the missionary's house, knock, knock, knock. Missionary woman opens, slams the door, you're not welcome. I'm the German ambassador. How can you do this? Goes back home, gets there, his legation's on fire. I mean, what kind of bad day can you have? Then it's his birthday coming up. Invitations go out, nobody comes. I mean, can you be slapped any harder? So he goes to investigate, and it turns out Madame Weber, the Russian ambassador's wife, who does not like him, has been spreading these horrible rumors. My personal feeling is, if there's smoke, there's probably a little bit of fire. Because shortly afterwards, the German club opens up. It's a German men's club. Missionaries are not welcome, especially women. And we don't know what happens in there, because there are no stories. What happens in the German club stays in the German club. 10 minutes. All right, I'm hurrying. I'm sorry. So anyway, February 11th. That's the day King Gojong is escaping. There we have wonderful Gojong and we have wonderful Sunjong. Nobody likes Sunjong. Every foreigner says he looks like an idiot. I don't think he looks. I think he's got a bum rap. This is probably about 1900. This is after he's been poisoned. Okay, 1898, he was poisoned with coffee. Now he does look like an idiot. Okay, he's also been rendered impotent from the poison, so he's never going to have an heir. These two guys, they're going to leave. They've planned, they're going to escape from the palace, and they're going to run off to the Russian legation. This is what Sally has to say. On Monday evening, the 10th, the English representative, Mr. Hillard, gave a diplomatic dinner to welcome the new Russian charge and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Speyer, who are not very nice people, We spent a very pleasant evening. Everyone seemed jolly and in good spirits, especially the Russians. Why are the Russians so happy? Because they're having guests the next morning. Now, Krein, that German guy who has the orgies in the legation, Krein somehow got word of it. And he goes to the Russians and says, hey, why don't you let me in on this? And, you know, I can't do anything to stop it, so let me in so I can fill out the report. I'll look good. Nothing's happening. Very next day, Gojong's in the legation, crying is furious. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you lie to me? Why did you make me lie to you? So, crying, and you don't see crying invited to the Russians very often. They escape in one of these chairs, actually two of these chairs. And the story is kind of, there are so many variations that you'll have to look them up for yourself. The reason why the 11th was chosen supposedly was because of a birthday party on the 10th, and it was assumed that the two watchers, there were two women who watched Gojong and Sunjong, it was assumed that they were drunk and not as observant at that time. I don't know, there are 3 or 4 variations, choose your own. Off they go, they head up to the Russian legation, nice place, the palace. Peter, you and I talked about this before. They say it's a Russian legation. Do you think it's?
No.
No, that's
I don't think so. Yeah. But everything I see, it always says the Russian legation.
And that's quite late as well.
Yeah.
Long after. That's during the Urusai Yoyak.
Yeah. Anyway, during the Russian stay, think about how crowded it is. And there are a lot of questions I have, because Weber is there, Speyer is there. After Gojong gets into the Russian legation, Speyer is told you can leave now. He was supposed to become the new minister, but Weber's going to stay. A Japanese newspaper reported that the Russian minister and his wife have only a room for their own private use, owing to the number of human parasites, and of course this Japanese newspaper, who are being accommodated in the legation. Madame Weber is reported to be greatly annoyed by the smell of the leek, the principal article of the king's attendants, diet of king's attendants. This is said to be Gojong's bedroom in the Russian legation. Again, I've seen people trying to figure out where exactly it is. It's said to be here. And then this is the other room that he had. Out here are his ministers. In the courtyard, they've set up small buildings. And that's where the Korean court is. Ministers are there. I think there's only one court official who's actually leaving the place. He's a brave man. I don't know where everybody's staying at. And here's, I wish Hans Alexander was here. Sontag. We all know Sontag. Sontag is Weber's sister-in-law. Where is she staying at? And why is she only mentioned twice in the letters? Is she not liked by the Sills? Why is it when there are events, she's not on the guest list? There's some strange things going on. Where is she living at? Supposedly, she's the one that introduced King Gojong to coffee. And we know that's not quite true either. But where is she living at? She's been in Korea since 1885, too. One of the things for Gojong, while he's there in the Russian legation, is the Russians want him back out. And Gojong says, I'll go back to the palace if you guard me with Russian soldiers. And that's not going to happen. So the Russians tell him, we'll train your military. And they bring over Russian military advisors. And you can see a Russian military advisor there to the side. They do a pretty good job. It's not an easy task. Russians are known to be pretty tough. In fact, a lot of the Koreans thought they were being tortured. They brought in gymnastic equipment. That wasn't a go. In fact, When they first started choosing people, everybody got sick. I can't do it. I'm sick. I'm too small. I can't do it. So they had to actually force them into their positions. Became a very well-trained group, though. They were very well-trained. I have no time, so I have to hurry. That slave driver, Brother Anthony. Why do I have a tiger here? Because King Gojong wasn't the only monarch at the Russian legation. Somebody in the countryside found a tiger cub. The mother had been killed and decided to give it to the king. Super white elephant, you know. What are you going to do with a tiger? I mean, you're already sleeping in somebody else's house. What are you going to do with this tiger? But they have, and he's got a great idea. I'll give it to Weber. So he gave it to Weber. So now Weber's got this tiger cub. But everybody wants to come and take pictures, especially Sally, who comes over. Lily comes over and takes pictures. It's a very popular thing. Mentioned and unmentioned. Sontag, we already talked about her. Hillary, we talked about her last lecture, the little hussy. She ran off with an Irish member of the Korean Customs Service. They eloped in the middle of the night. Hussy. Philip Jason, Sojay Phil, part of the We're Going to Take Over the Government movement. And his wife, Muriel Armstrong. Family? Huh?
No, I'm joking.
Don't mess with me. And there, I don't know if that's the same dog. She had a dog here in Korea that everybody hated. I mean, they hated. She used to kiss the dog all the time. And Alan hated that dog. But everybody hates Alan. Muriel is a thing of interest. She's an American, and she's married a Korean. And she's probably like the first one. And so everybody's got interest, but I can find no negative thing about her. The only thing, Sally says something like, I don't see how she did it. But that's it. Now, Sojay Phil, or Philip Jason, when he gets into Korea, I think he gets here like 1896 or something like that. One of the first things he does is go to a hospital, and there's a wounded soldier, Korean soldier. He's been shot at close range with buckshot. And I guess it left a wound so big that it was like the size of a dinner plate. And the medical doctor in the interior, first aid, got a chicken and killed it and put half of it inside the wound. Oh. Hey, chicken will cure anything. He got back to Seoul, and none of the doctors would touch it. All the Western doctors, no way. This man dies, I'm going to be blamed for it. But he took it upon himself, and he treated it. The guy did not die from infection. He died from malnutrition. Who would figure he had a whole chicken in there? Great house. Not the most popular man. Great lawyer. You can read all that. I got to quickly hurry. Brother Anthony's giving me the look. Jason describes Great House as one American who originally came from San Francisco and was employed as an advisor to the Department of Law. He was a brilliant lawyer and agreeable personality. I don't know what I grammar. But he acquired the taste of Korean rice wine and stayed under its influence most of the time. So did his mother. His 80-some-year-old mother was here, and she was crocked all the time. They were together crocked. He accomplished very little in the codification of Korean law, for which purpose he was employed. I don't know why I have that one there. Yeah. Charles William Legendre, great man, Civil War hero, French by birth, one eye, great negotiator in China. Don't want to negotiate, I'll take my eye out, throw it up in the air, catch it, and ask you, can you do the same thing? If you can't, agree with me. There was another American named Legendre who was employed by the royal household as master of ceremonies of public banquets. He was not a man of education or refinement. and lived there just like a Korean yangban with a Korean woman as his concubine. He used to hold a private court of his own at his house and settled disputed debts among the Koreans, for which work he had no authority. I was told that he received a considerable sum of money from this illegal enterprise. And, so Philip Jason concludes, when a foreigner becomes yangbanized, he is worse than the most conservative Korean yangban. While in Korea, do as the Koreans do. He was not the only one that had negative thoughts towards him. Yoon Ji-ho, Generals Legendre and Dai, two useless Americans are fattening themselves on high salaries for doing nothing. So far as rascals are concerned, Korea could certainly do amply without importing any from abroad. 2 minutes. Yeah. Where's Alan? I won't talk about him. I hate him. Okay. All right. Alan eventually takes over. Okay. The politics. Alan's on one side, Sills on the other side. Alan's side wins. Sills' side loses. He's gone. A lot of hatred between these two. Alan badmouths him all the time. And later, after he leaves, Alan says, all he did was guard. But as soon as he's gone, and people start paying compliments to the legation's garden, Alan claims it as his own. He's responsible for it. When the Sills left Korea on September 27, 1897, they received so many gifts from King Gojong that they had to get 60 additional cases to take their goods back. King Gojong actually seemed to like them. He arrived in Los Angeles in late October. Sally feared to be on her deathbed. The doctors did not think she would survive. She recovers. She outlives John. He passed away on April 6, 1901. Alan sends letters of condolences. They just reek of insincerity. I do not like Alan. Alan badmouths him the entire time. Alan actually knew about King Gojong's flight. Sill did not. Alan kind of points everything as Sill doing something. Go away. Sally passes away on February 23rd, 1903. Done. Thank you.